Okay. So just to clarify then that I have started the video recording. All right, so welcome then. Welcome everyone. So welcome to, this is another NIROMP Community of Practice session today. Focus on the need for an approach to adoption that includes maintaining relationships with birth families. So really pleased to welcome Julie Young. And Julie will introduce herself shortly, no doubt. And we're also looking forward to colleague Vicky joining us. So without further ado, what I'm going to just suggest is that people, if you could just pop your names and where you're from in the chat, that'll be really nice. Just a little bit about where you come from, and any questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, good practice from your area. It's always nice to hear about that in the chat function too. Okay, all right. So Julie, if it's all right with you, then I'll hand over.
It is indeed. Yes. Thank you very much, Sharon. And thank you to everybody for enabling me to share this space and be present to talk to you today about this topic, which is very close to my heart. So yes, I'm Julie Young. I'm a research fellow from the University of East Anglia, and I've been researching adoption as well as foster care and special guardianship for over 2 decades now, working with colleagues such as Beth Neal, who I'm sure you've heard of because she's much more famous than me. And in fact, if you were tuning into Women's Hour last Friday, you would have heard her speak there as well on this very topic. So I do recommend you tune into that if you haven't already, and hear from her and another couple of fabulous people, especially Claire, who I know from How to Be Adopted as well. So Beth is one of my colleagues who inspired me and inspired a whole team of us at UEA to look into this topic. So this is the first webinar in a series of 3, and we are running this in collaboration with Adoption England. And we have here today Vicky Swift from Adoption England, who will, although she's not doing the main talk with me, she does have the very important role of following the chat for me, so I don't have to be looking at it the whole time that I'm speaking. So thank you, Vicky. I can see you've arrived and introduced yourself on the chat. So as Sharon said, please do use the chat. Please do use it for comments, for any examples you want to pass on that are relevant to things that I'm talking about, as well as questions. Vicky will try to answer some of the questions as we go through, and there will also be hopefully time at the end where we can maybe focus on a couple of them as well and allow the space for any interaction between all of us who attend. So this is, as I said, meant to be a series of 3 webinars, so do try and attend the others. And if you know anyone who's not here today, encourage them to listen to the recording so that they do get the whole context of the topic. It's a topic that's very complex and nuanced and can easily be misinterpreted or things taken out of context. So that's why we really wanted to give the space to 3 more webinars. And also, of course, the advantage of having 2 later webinars means that I can pick up on anything which is raised in this one as well, where I feel it needs a bit more time. So again, another purpose of the chat to talk about things that we can focus on in future webinars. So our research at UEA has involved interviewing or collecting the experiences and views of many different people impacted by adoption. As I said, we've been doing it for over 20 years. And what all that research has continually highlighted is a need for change to how we do adoption. And what we've been calling post-adoption contact. Contact is not an ideal word. I think it's much better to say how we do relationships in adoption, how we communicate with all the different people that matter to us, and how we meet the identity needs of adopted children, young people, and adults. But contact is a well-used shorthand for those more complicated terms. So please think of it as an umbrella term, because I'm likely to use it today. I know it's on the slides, but think of it as just an umbrella term. What we really mean is about maintaining relationships in the way that's right for the individuals. In the past, it felt like us at UEA and a sprinkling of others across England and Wales, it felt like we were the only ones perhaps calling for big changes across this area in adoption, and we were struggling to make things known. But over the last 6 years or so, across multiple spheres, voices from different people and organizations have started joining together to say the same. And all these quotes on this slide, which I'm not going to read all of them, show how much it's being talked about in many different areas. So we've got here from Andrew McFarlane, the president of the Family Court. He started saying that we need to focus more on this issue of contact, make changes in this area. He started saying this in 2017, in 2018, and he's also referred to it more recently in more recent talks in 2023 and also 2024. That's the Mayflower talk and the Potato Group talk, which are available online if you want to see the whole talk, which I recommend you do. Also, the BASWA inquiry into ethics and the role of the social worker in adoption, they highlighted it. McAllister's independent review of children's social care stressed the importance of relationship continuity, and also applied that to adoption, saying we should rethink contact, because we know how important continuing relationships are in almost every other sphere of family life, including in foster care and kinship care. The government paper, Adoption Strategy Achieving Excellence Everywhere, the House of Lords Select Committee, which published a report on the Children's and Families Act, in fact included a very hard-hitting quote that if we fail to modernise contact, that threatens to undermine the whole adoption system. So really strong messages from many different places. Adoption England, Vicky Swift is here from Adoption England, and this is one of their 4 strategic priorities, modernising contact so people can maintain relationships with people who were important to them before they were adopted. And the final 2 quotes from Adoption UK, the charity that supports adoptive parents and adopted people. We're picking up from things such as their adoption barometer that the mood around adoptive parents is changing too, no doubt influenced by the vast number of podcasts and social media we have, which is highlighting not only the gaps and needs that adopted adults talked about, but also people that are doing it differently and finding it's working for them, like the Two Good Mums podcast. It's influencing the way all the everyday people are thinking about adoption too. And one of their recent barometers found that a lot more adoptive parents are willing or seeing the need to promote children's links than they were before. And a lot of them are becoming frustrated by a system that prevents them from doing that. I think previously we've often thought it's the adoptive parents who won't like it, even if we think it might be best. We're actually hearing that that there's a lot of people who are feeling it is actually the other way around. And the last quote, adult adoptees, last but absolutely not least, because this is what this is all about. It's about the adults for whom adoption is a life-changing event, and we must absolutely make sure we meet their needs, and that will be the focus of this webinar. Lots of voices from adult adoptees. So all this very busy slide shows that we can't fail to see there's widespread agreement and strong feelings about this topic. And in fact, McFarlane in his latest lecture stated the debate has moved on from whether we need a new approach to how we actually do it now. And that's what we are working with Adoption England to do. Look at how we can make the changes. We know we need to, and now we need to look at how. And these webinars that I'm doing with you, with the IRO community, is actually part of a whole big program of work that's going on in all different spheres of adoption. So in fact, these webinars are a shortened version of, I think it's 14 webinars we have which we've been doing for social work practitioners and adoption social workers across the country. They are available on a private YouTube link for people to see, where they go into things in much more detail. We've also been running community of practice workshops for practitioners and managers. And we've also been producing resources. We've been revamping a website, for example, which will have lots of resources based on our research at UEA, lots of training materials as well. So this little series of webinars is part of a huge project where we are trying to look at how and we can actually change things now in adoption. And of course, I also need to mention, of course, what something that was published just a few weeks ago now, early November, the Public Law Working Group on Adoption, which I'm sure you're aware of. It brought the topic into the national news, hence the Women's Hour programme, and things were discussed on the Today programme and BBC News as well. It states that we need to see a sea change in the approach to the question of face-to-face contact between the child and the birth family. And we need to, it recognizes that it's very complex. There's no one size fits all. Absolutely not. It's definitely not saying we need to do this for everybody, but it's saying perhaps we haven't been doing it enough and with the people that we should be thinking about. So what we need is a truly tailor-made approach. Things have been a bit cut and paste in adoption, very different to other areas of family life in the courts. But it has been very cut and paste. What we now need to do is look at every individual case and look at what's right for them, what can be achieved safely for them, and make sure it does include and promote face-to-face contact if that can be safely achieved. It's saying that we also need training for adoptive parents to change. We need training for all professionals to change, all the multitude of professionals that are involved in adoption. And we also need to make sure we're signposting birth parents to independent support services. And there are recommendations as well for practice in this report, recommendations at the pre-proceeding stage, during adoption proceedings, recommendations for practice that will be very relevant to IROs. So I will be coming back to those in later webinars. Yeah, so that's something I will be coming back to. Well, one thing the report did say is that the legal context we are working in currently is actually, that the feeling was, it's generally still fit for practice. We actually don't want to change that. What we do need to do, though, is apply it in a different way. And that means that practitioners and professionals need to be doing it differently. So they really need to go back to the law, look at what it says, and make sure that they are really thinking about what it is saying. So unlike in foster care, there's no duty to promote contact. It must be considered, a very open word. It says before making an adoption order, the court must consider whether there should be arrangements for allowing any person contact with the child. So it could be interpreted as just think about it, don't worry about doing anything. But in fact, if we really take that seriously, it means that we need to really weigh up what is right for this child. It also says for allowing any person, not just the parents. And when I say parents, actually the focus tends to just be on the mother. They're the ones who are often seen to be the important person at the time. But we mustn't forget that there are fathers, there are aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins. There could be a whole team of people that could be safe and relevant and important for that child. So if we're really thinking about that first statement, we should be looking at the whole network, using eco maps or whatever to really look at that. And really truly weigh up the benefits and the risks involved to make sure it's safe. The paramount consideration is that we should be thinking about the child's welfare throughout their life, thinking ahead for this child throughout their entire lifespan, because adoption is for life, and that makes it very different, I think, to all other orders that will be made in court, which are made for the child's minority. This is not just for the minority. We need to be thinking ahead, not just for the period where the child is young. We must not forget that they will grow up to become an independent thinker. They will be questioning, challenging. They will become a teenager, able to go on the internet to look up things themselves. They will turn 18. They will become of an age to make their own decisions and get out there in the world and make their own decisions about their relationships. They may become a partner, they may become a parent themselves. And we need to think about how that whole lifetime experience, becoming older, suffering from health issues, what will that whole lifetime experience be like for someone where they've been cut off from their birth family? So the third point, the effect, we need to really seriously think about the effect on a child of ceasing to be a member of the birth family, maybe not ever know members of the birth family, because in the period, even if a reunion happens, often people die. People that you may have lost trace of people, and it may not be possible to connect with people in the future. You're leaving things to chance really there. So we do need to think about what is it going to be like for this child to cease to be a member of their birth family throughout their whole life. So all those points must be taken seriously. And the Adoption and Children's Act also did say that orders can be made, both at the PO stage and the placement order stage and at the adoption order stage as well. We're very rarely using them, but the court does have powers to do that, and again, that will be something I'll pick up in later webinars for us to think about that. And it would also be very good to hear from you across the country, whether and when you're hearing about orders being made at these stages. So that's provided a bit of context to where we are today, why we're here, why I'm here delivering this talk and talking about our culture change project on maintaining relationships in adoption. One thing we mustn't forget with all the stuff going on about maintaining relationships, because it can make us feel, well, is adoption something we shouldn't even be doing in the first place? We mustn't forget that actually adoption is very positive. It's been shown in research time and time again that for most people, adoption generally works out very well. It can be a significant positive turning point in a person's life story. It provides safety, love, a secure sense of belonging in a forever family, with adults highly motivated to be parents in every sense of the word, to be as true a parent as they can be to that child. It gives them a chance to really feel they belong and to recover from early adversity, to build positive memories with others, more secure representations of attachment. And we hear this time and time again from our own research, things like we did everything together as a family. We were wanted. It brought us a lot closer as a family. We have so many shared memories, lots of positives around adoption. It set me up for the rest of my life, really. Even people who may fall out with their parents, this can happen in any family. When we speak to adopted adults, they can look back and see the power of adoption and the difference it made to their lives. So let's remember that when we look at this topic, and not forget that this permanence that adoption brings is important for children. It really does matter, and it really does create families that want to be families. But at the same time, we also need to focus on the fact that adoption is not a simple happy ever after story. It's not like Cinderella going off with the prince and forgetting everything else that happened in the past, because at the same time as adopted adults expressing largely positive views about their adoption, we also hear that they talk about the harm of relationship discontinuity, the loss that they experience in adoption, which is ambiguous because people are still out there. It's disenfranchised loss because it's not recognized in society in the same way that we have with bereavements or even divorce. It's something which isn't talked about. And they also talk about identity issues as well. If we just focus on the happy story of adoption, the good things that adoption can bring and overlook these negatives. If we don't acknowledge them or face up to them, we're not helping children, young people, and adults process those complex feelings that they can have around adoption. We're not being honest with children about their situation. And if we don't really think about this side of adoption as well, we're not going to be able to stop some of the negative happening in the first place, because we can. It is possible to have both. And we've been hearing about this negative side of adoption alongside the positive ever since John Trisleotis, the great adoption researcher in the 70s and the 80s, started publishing his work. But it's just taken a while for us to really take this seriously. We're still a bit stuck in the dark ages with how we've done adoption. It's always been this way. And there's a bit of that, let's carry on and do it that way. Unfortunately, it does feel like it's been a long slog. So the focus of this talk is to really help us to focus on that more negative side, particularly at the beginning here, so that we can look at how we can deal with it, how we can make it better for people. So let's just go through some of those added challenges of closed adoptions that people are referring to. And I'm saying closed adoption because, as we'll be seeing in this and later webinars, actually that is generally what we have today. Even though there's been a big push towards some type of contact opening up with life story books and later life letters and letterbox contact, what we find actually is that letterbox contact usually does not carry on, or it's not at all satisfactory. So for many people, it feels like it's a closed adoption. And all these quotes have been taken from many different types of research that we have done. And many do include younger people as well, as I'll be referring to, younger people from the sort of letterbox age of adoption. So people frequently refer to lack of knowledge of their family, their birth history, their genetic history as being an issue. Not seeing people who look like you as you grow up, not knowing how might you turn out, not having any sense of how your own biology and genetic makeup may influence you as you grow, particularly important for adolescents. People who've been adopted have talked about body issues because their body is changing in adolescence and they don't get a sense of how actually they're going to be because they don't look at all like their adoptive parents. So issues around identity because of that, but also the damage of having no medical history can actually be very scary and dangerous. What about the child who's wondering when they'll hit puberty? What about the woman who's wondering whether she'll have an early menopause, or is asked by the doctor, does she have a history of breast cancer in her family? All these kind of things can be actually really important to know, but we can lose touch with those if we don't have that connect with our birth family. Also, the loss of an early life and shared memories that make us feel like a whole person when we hear about perhaps how we were in the womb, or what our birth was like, or what we were like as a toddler or a small child. Missing out on those stories, people say it makes us feel rootless, incomplete, as if we just appeared out of nowhere. We hear people say things like, I want to know more about my birth parents because I don't feel I know enough, like who they were, if I have anything in common with them, to know where all my little traits come from, the way I walk, all that kind of thing. I want to find out who I am. And we hear adults say adoptees don't arrive as a blank slate. We have our own history and family tree, no matter the circumstances of how we come to be adopted. And in fact, the popularity of TV programs such as Who Do You Think You Are? And also the popularity of ancestry and finding out about your ancestors shows us that this is a human need to know about our connections, and we're cutting this off. And the second quote here is actually from a teenager who was, so it isn't just older adults starting to think, it's quite young people thinking they actually need to know more about who they are. For some people, because adoption can happen often when children are 2, 3, 4 years old, they can actually be aware of lived relationships ending. People that they've known or lived with, brothers and sisters, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, cousins who may be in their community, people just disappearing in a way that's hard to understand. Not only can this cause confusion, sadness, grief, anxiety, worry, but it can also impact on their sense of belonging, their sense of self-worth, as a person who will always be cared for, that people will always stand by you? What does it do to a small child of 3 or 4 if people just disappear and you do not fully understand why? What does that do to your understanding of yourself as worthy? For young people who are egocentric, self-centric, they can feel rejected or blame themselves. I remember one young child in one of our studies said, "I think I cried too much, and that's why I was adopted." We hear of people say, pushing people away. It's something I've always done, scared of being rejected. If I'm the one pushing, you can't reject me. So having lifelong implications of how they are with their family. I felt when I was younger quite empty sometimes. I used to fill that void. I was going to school and stealing. And I think it was because I didn't have my mum in my life. It haunted me. The jigsaw wasn't complete. So people talk about this really impacting them, these vague memories of this people who just disappeared. How can you have trust in the concept of a forever family? How can you see the world as secure and stable? How can you trust and attach to new strangers if you have this knowledge that people can just disappear? And that's that. The loss is an ambiguous loss because people are still out there. You've still got this other shadow family. What are they like? How are they doing? Were they really not good enough? And have they changed? We hear of children and teenagers talking about this as being something they think about in their sleep, wanting to ask, how did my dad die? Or things like that. Am I able to get in contact with my mum now? Because they're still out there. And these children, these teenagers are realizing that people change. Something that happened when you were 2 or 3, well, you've changed. Maybe they've changed too. What's going on? Having this other shadow family that can be hard to make sense of. As a teenager, one of our young adults said to us, there was a lot of real negative emotions around my adoption, this desperation to know who my birth mother was. So ambiguous loss because these people are still out there. They may have changed. They may have had other children. They may be thinking about them. But it's also a disenfranchised loss. It's something that's not talked about or recognized by others. We focused on the happy family story. The adoptive family is your story now. We don't have the rituals around it. And many adopted people tell us they think and feel about these difficult feelings on their own. Their feelings are not shared by others in their family. They feel alone with them in this strange two-family identity. They find it hard to talk about. Continually in research, we hear that children and young people, even those who take part in research on adoption, who are probably from the more open families, even they tell us that they don't share things always with their adoptive parents. Debbie Watson's study on children and their life story books found that some of the young children in that study said they only look at their life story book at night. They only look at it when their parents don't know. There's this fear of upsetting, wanting to be loyal. Adults have referred to the guilt of potentially upsetting their adoptive family if they voice feelings about their birth family being stuck in the middle. And the problem is that because they don't raise it, adults can be assuming that they're not thinking about these things. They may rely on the child initiating talk or contact, think they're not ready for it, but we've seen time and time again that adults often underestimate children's needs and interest in adoption. So they're left to do it on their phones at night in their rooms because it's not being talked about. Of course, how people react to their adoption does vary. Not everyone will be curious, but what we know is that many are curious. And the big question for a lot of people, the most popular question is, why was I adopted? And it kind of makes sense. That's a big question, really, because it cuts to the center of your very identity. Why are you in this really unusual position of being an adopted person, someone who is not with your birth parent, when almost everyone else in society is in families where their birth parents would do anything to care for their child? What is it about you? Why? And I hear that for many of them that they are struggling with this why. it's a story that doesn't make sense, particularly when you're concrete thinkers, particularly when you don't really understand child protection processes or mental illness or learning difficulties. It's very hard to make sense of your story. Even if children have life story books, it's really hard to make sense. You're looking at your books, you know that's one person's view. You may have memories of contact with your birth parents that don't seem to fit. Sorry, I'm getting over a chesty cough, so apologies for my voice breaking. What does this do when we don't fully understand why children are adopted? We don't understand our own story. Here is one teenager talking to us about having no idea of the circumstances of why he was adopted. He said, I was given basic information like one picture, but I don't think that's enough to go on. And I remember when I was only about 10, it really bothered me. Why was I adopted? Why couldn't I see my birth mother? And I still feel mixed, completely mixed, like a roller coaster. Sometimes I'm upset I can't see her, but then I have in the past become angry. Why did you give me up for adoption? Lots of whys. We seek stories that make sense. We're sense-making creatures. We need them to be understandable and meaningful. What is it like to a child who is 10, who's starting to wonder more about that story they were told? Your parents were ill, but hang on, ill people get better. Your parents were poor, or they weren't supported, or they chose these drugs over caring for you. But what does that really mean? What does it mean for me and for my parents, why that happened? It is a story that's really hard to make sense of when you have words. And we know from research of children with care experience that not really understanding why can lead to a lack of trust really in the whole process, in the system, lack of trust in the adults. A study that Joe Staines and Julie Selwyn did showed that children in care who didn't understand why they were removed from their parents had more placement moves. They felt more insecure. They felt they weren't wanted, and they also felt more responsible for being taken into care, which meant low self-esteem, low well-being. The why really matters, but it's very hard to really make sense of that. And even as you can see from middle childhood, when your brain is jumping on in leaps in your cognitive understanding of the world, but you don't have that mature understanding of adults yet, and you're trying to make sense of the story. Schizophrenia, were ill, really difficult to understand, and can have long-lasting effects in your whole trust in the world, in society, in your parents. And at the same time, you're dealing with this where you have these stigmas and narratives around adoption, that it isn't something you should talk about. You should be grateful. You should be lucky or chosen. We hear of adopted adults who said that's how they felt. That's what they were picking up from people, that they should be grateful, not upsetting their adoptees who really badly wanted to be their real mum and dad, make them their child. And that can all lead to struggle voicing questions, struggle to express your emotions around this, and blocking memories, feeling that you shouldn't be thinking about it. And of course, when you're left with not talking about it, left to your own thoughts and feelings in your head, your imagination can take over. One teenager said, I had this vision, I'm going to meet my birth mum, and it scared me. How horrible, how awful must she be if your imagination had just left to play in your mind? What must this person be like, that they're so horrible we can't even just see them? How scary is that? Another said, I think my anger was because I didn't know much information about them. Me being angry was because of the fear of unknowing. I've heard young children say to me that they thought their mum must have been like a witch because they knew she hurt him when he was young, and mothers who hit their children or hurt their children, they must be like witches or wicked stepmothers from fairy stories. Left to your own devices, your memory can play havoc on your thoughts. So I've talked before about the actual experiencing loss, but for many adopted people who were adopted very young, as babies, as infants, they may not feel the loss at the time, but they can become aware of the loss and become aware of these people they were never given a chance to get to know. One adopted adult, older adult, who took part in one of our surveys said, I've never met my birth brothers. We were adopted separately, and we only found out about each other in our late 50s. So we're always thinking about how life might have been if we'd known each other. A raw wound that never heals. So a loss that wasn't actually experienced, but a covert loss, realizing what they've lost, their lost opportunities. Another teenager found out that their birth mum had died a few years ago and then felt this huge letdown. They died when they never had a chance to meet them, never had a chance to get answers. And unfortunately, parents of children who are removed into the care system do die more prematurely than others. They're from more disadvantaged backgrounds, suffer more health inequalities, physical and emotional inequalities, and they are more likely to pass away. And not just parents, but what about all that other extended family out there as well that may die before the child becomes 18, and there are lost opportunities, never chances to get to know them. For some children in transracial adoptions, there can also be yet another layer of complexity around being adopted, as well as Jackie Kay, the famous poet who wrote in her autobiography Red Dust Road, a brilliant book about being adopted and feeling different to adoptive parents. She said, well, part of me came from Africa, but that part was foreign to myself because I'd never been to this dark continent, and I could only really have it burning away hot and dusty in my mind. It's not so much being black in a white country means that people don't accept you as, say, Scottish, which she was. It's that being black in a white country makes you a stranger to yourself. Even if you're not in a transracial placement, just thinking or feeling differently to your adoptive parents can make you feel like a stranger, and shows us the importance of just having people we are biologically related to is important. We hear this time and time again. The PAC UKB consults showed that adopted adults very rarely felt they had enough information about their birth families, rarely felt they had enough information as to why they were adopted, and even less enough to make sense of their own identity. No mirrors, no one to reflect back to me who I was, that I was okay, that I was normal for me, for my genetic family, and not some kind of freak. So really bearing down into the core of us, our identity. And what's the journey like for the sorts of children who are adopted today are often older. This young person who we've called Reese comes from our longitudinal study of adoption, and he was adopted age 4. So he did have quite clear memories of his birth family, and they were negative experiences for him. And the direct contact with his birth mother was cut off. They had letterbox, but she never wrote back. So a very typical situation of someone who does end up being in a closed adoption. And when he was young, he seemed okay with that. It was like, I don't need to think about her. I don't need her. They're out of my life. And that was the kind of message that he was giving out about this mother who was not in his life anymore. But as he became older, his feelings changed drastically. And he started thinking about her constantly, lots of questions and difficult feelings. Well, why did she treat me like that? What was going on? What was going on from her? Very much wanted to see her. Lots of self-blame going on as well. Was it something I done? Why me out of everyone? What's her problem? His brain starting to process his story in a whole new way, and having odd memories, maybe some of the positive memories in there too, clouding his clear thinking around this topic. What's her problem? Why won't she contact me? Really struggling with the fact there was no contact at all, completely cut off in his life. He did want to he very much wanted to see them, but he was told he's too young. He needs to wait until he's an adult. So he was only about 14, 15 when he started going through this. And in fact, his feelings grew to be so intense, he couldn't wait. So like some teenagers who don't get their needs met, he did reestablish contact with his family because he found them on social media at age 18. Age 16, only 16, he moved out of his adoptive home and was propelled into a period of even greater turbulence as he'd idolized this other family as they must be better. I need to be with them. Thankfully, things did settle down, and when we interviewed him later, he had realized the limitations of his birth family, and he'd almost cut off contact again, almost entirely, just a little contact with her now, realizing that she's not mother material. But he had to go through this horrible journey, and unfortunately it was one that was unsupported, without professionals, because of this feeling of, well, you can just wait until you're 18. For many, they can't, and it shows the real complexity roller coaster that many young people go on. And I hear from so many people that they may have had some type of letter contact or whatever, that they just weren't interested in the first years of their adopted life. But later on, things can really change when your brain is rethinking about your story, and you may have questions that you need answers to, need to really know, well, what does it mean to not be able to be a mother? And unfortunately, this can go unrecognized. Many talk about it. Well, we heard from an earlier quote, it happened around 10 years old. Others may say it happens at 13, 14, 15. And they feel they're being told messages. You don't go there. Don't think about it. Do it when you're older. But unfortunately, they can't wait. They feel they can't wait. And we end up with this very negative, damaging contact with people doing it in this unsupported, unmediated, very drastic way, and the consequences can be extremely negative. So a case showing that, but also showing how up and down connections with birth family can be, how complex they can be to make decisions for young children that really truly are about their life, that take them through this tricky teenage phase as well. The Adoption Barometer in 2023, just last year, said that more than 1/5 of 13 to 18-year-olds had direct contact with a birth relative outside of any formal agreement. So very common to have this. So we need to be thinking ahead. How can we prevent this kind of thing happening? So I've talked about young people and their needs that we need to think about when we're making decisions about contact. What about birth relatives as well? They are another group of people that are drastically affected by this act of adoption in a more brutal way than any other order will mean for that person. And they too end up often being in closed adoptions. The mother that I'm quoting from on this slide had been getting letters from her adoptive parents at the very beginning, but they'd suddenly stopped, no explanation, not realizing why they had stopped, leaving her with this, what's happened to her? Where is she? What's she like? It's always on your mind what they look like. Would I know them if I bumped into them? Scouring the crowds, thinking about they're there, maybe looking at social media because they don't know what they look like now, wanting to know. This mother said it's part of your life. They want to know, do they know we love them? Everything goes through your mind at Christmas time. I'm thinking about, oh, would they have liked that? What's their interest now? It's on your mind always. We can see that for birth relatives, it's not out of sight, out of mind. In many of the people we've spoken to grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings as well, who talk about this severe loss due to adoption. And again, a disenfranchised loss because you can't talk about it. It's clouded with shame and stigma, and people don't support you with it. And it's also an ambiguous loss because these people could be out there somewhere. Feelings of loss people share will never go away. They talk about the stigma. We can't talk about it to anybody because it's just not an everyday conversation. It's like a taboo thing. Shame and worthlessness, we find impacts people. They feel they've done something so evil. I don't want to live. Many people withdraw, become suicidal. No wonder it's so difficult to take part in contact when you feel so full of shame and worthlessness. How can you feel that your life is going to be worth anything to this new, well-functioning, properly assessed adoptive family who've taken over your child? What good will it do for you to be involved in that contact? The anger can also impact on how they are in their child's life in the future. They engaging with the agency who took their child away is often the only way they can have some kind of contact or can arrange to meet the adoptive parents, but they feel so angry with that agency that they cannot engage with them. They can't do anything that may help them to stay linked with their adopted child. So lots of feelings which can impact them forever and impact them in the roles that they can potentially have for their adopted children as well. These feelings are all really hard to resolve if you don't see anything of the good outcomes that can come of adoption. If you can't see your child doing well and flourishing, and we do hear from many people we've spoken to who do gain positive things from seeing that their child is happy and that they're growing up, that they're looked after and they're loved. Finding out that they're loved can be so important to someone who hasn't had good care themselves, as many birth parents have not had in their past. They may have had a lifetime of abuse, even from the care system. They may have had poor care. And so to see their child is happy and well looked after can be really positive, and particularly if they can see that the family is still acknowledging their birth family as well. Some of the colleagues I've worked with at UEA have done research into the father's experience of adoptions as well, and found that they too feel all of those kind of feelings that women do after adoption. They can feel also, particularly perhaps more strongly, the humiliation of the adoption, because fathers are meant to be the protectors, aren't they? They're meant to be the ones who stand up, who are the ones who care in a much more physical way for the child. And the alternative ways in which they manage those emotions of shame or guilt can determine outcomes for the men and their future relationships with the children. What we find is that men often show their vulnerabilities and emotions of their feelings around the adoption in a different way to mothers. So they may, for example, show much more anger around the event and fighting, as this quote says, the assessment centre, I hadn't put my children's emotions above myself. I was embroiled in a fight with the local authority. Of course I was embroiled in a fight. The bastards had been lying about me. So very much externally projecting their humiliation, their shame and their guilt into anger and a fighting stance, which can be really difficult for those professionals, of course, working with them, who are at the other end of this anger and this fighting. And all this can mean that they become much more disengaged, that it's harder for professionals to engage with fathers in this kind of stance of fighting and anger. And they can it can be harder for them to recognize the needs and the vulnerabilities that fathers have, although they frequently do have those as well. And because of all this, we can find that fathers are not included as much in contact plans. They don't get referred to support as often as mothers. They don't take up support. The focus is more on the mothers, and fathers can get left out of the situation. And I've seen that in court settings, that there's a lot less involvement of fathers, and particularly in things like contact plans. And it's also easy to dismiss fathers when we see perhaps things in the paperwork that they are absent or not involved. But we really need to think about the context of, well, why are they absent? Why aren't they involved? Do they feel excluded? Is that what's going on? Because adopted young people tell us that the father gap is a big issue for them. It's almost like half of their whole family history can be missing for some young people if we're not engaging with fathers. So what is out there for birth relatives to help them around adoption? In the Adoption and Children's Act 2002, national minimum standards were set up for birth parents, where agencies have to recognise that birth parents and other relatives, they are vulnerable people who are impacted for life because of the adoption of their child, and we must consider their welfare and provide services. So agencies must make active efforts to obtain information for the child around birth parents, because of all what we've seen and how important this is for the child. Contact plans should be informed by birth parents because we want them to participate in it, so we need to make sure we're really linking in with their needs and making sure we have practical and emotional support for them. We need to make sure we're treating them fairly, without prejudice, openly, with respect, keep them informed, and we should make sure they're given access to and encouraged to use support services. So that was set out in 2002, and we conducted a study in the years following the act to find out, well, what was going on? How were agencies responding to this? To these legal changes and the support required to provide to birth relatives. And we found out that contact was actually frequently lost before adoption, especially with fathers. We found that constructive participation in contact planning, life story work, meeting adopters was all affected by the poor relationship with agencies and the poor functioning of parents. So they often could not engage because they had that really difficult relationship with agencies, and because of how they were vulnerable anyway, and the adoption spiraled them into an even worse vulnerable state of just not being able to engage at all. They needed help. They needed help ideally from independent people, not the social worker involved in the taking away of the child, to help them to get that support and to engage in contact. And that's where IROs can have a really important role. Independent support services, we found, where there was also a poor take up as well, because they were often given that referral from the social worker involved with the child. So they didn't trust anything that came from the social workers, feeling that there was collusion around. And this is, again, why IROs or someone that might be seen as independent can be truly important for encouraging parents to say, look, this really can help you. And what we found was that counselling models were not what they wanted at this stage. They wanted advocacy, they wanted advice, they wanted information, emotional support, yes. Peer and group support was helpful and help with contact, but something that's just called a counselling service was not what they wanted in this early stage, when they were still feeling that they hadn't given up the fight, the court proceedings hadn't completed, or the adoption order had not gone through, and they needed things talked about in a different way to see how they could participate in things. When they did actually get help, satisfaction with services was high, and they really valued that relationship-based support, feeling that the support service was independent. And particularly if the service was very flexible, and they needed it to be proactive. They wouldn't go and get the support, but they needed it to be proactive for them. They needed to be told about this support over and over again, and encouraged and recommended, because their emotions were so up and down constantly through this period that they may not take in the information. When it's told once, it needs to be told a multitude of times so that they get there, and it's offered to them in many different ways so that it gets there. And we found that if they did use services, not only were they satisfied with services, but it was linked to better outcomes in their mental health and coping with adoption as well. So it's really important we do help birth relatives access this support and become someone who can then help their child in the future. And there's a family rights group has put together a map of where support services can be found for birth relatives, which is important that you're all aware of, so you can really help people to access that support. So I've talked about young people and adults affected by adoption. I've talked about birth relatives, but what about the parents, the adoptive parents, who are taking on this role of becoming the parent in their child's life? What is important to them? We know that all adoptive parents want to be the very best parent they can be for their child. And professionals often think, well, we don't want to put too many burdens on them. We don't want to enforce the issue of contact. They won't like that. But we do know that adoptive parents want to be the very best parent they can be. So how can we help them to be the very best parent they can be? If we listen to adults reflect back on what qualities of parenting was really important to them, what they valued, it's nearly always said to be openness, open communication. This adult said, my parents were always open about what happened, that I could go and see my parents whenever I wanted, my birth parents. I had a file. I could go through the file if I wanted. They would always make time to go through it. It was always a very open experience, and one that I found really interesting and I was comfortable with, a shared experience of my adoption journey. We did it together, and my adopted parents were there with me, every part of me. This is a very typical quote that I see time and time again from people who talk about what they valued in adoptive parents. What is not valued is, as this other adult said, I think my mother would rather not even think about this birth family. She would just purely say, "You're my daughter," and that was it. She didn't want to go there. The Adoption Barometer in 2021 asked adopted young people and adults, what is your first priority? What is the most important thing parents can do for you in adoption? And they said, talk about all aspects of being adopted. Being communicatively open is highly valued in almost all the studies we've done on adoption. It's not only what we hear from young people, but we can see also in theories of adoptive parenting, such as that put forward by Brudzinski, a psychologist in adoption who's carried out lots of research in adoption, says that what matters for children is adoption communication openness. Regardless of whether a child grows up in a closed or open adoption, what matters most for healthy psychological adjustment is the creation of an open, honest, non-defensive and emotionally attuned family dialogue about adoption-related issues. And in fact, any issue really that impacts on the child, but openness, the essence of openness is one of the critical factors underlying the variability in adoption adjustment. It really matters. So we need to make sure adoptive parents who we know want to do the best for their children know that thinking and talking about adoption related issues is important. Let's just break down adoption communicative and openness a little bit more. Brudzinski says it's about empathy for the child. All adoptive parents, I'm sure, would say that they think about the child's needs, what's important for the child, and they want them to be safe and happy. But we hear in research constantly that children do think about, a lot of children, perhaps not every child, we must remember there's variability, but a lot of children do think about their birth family or their adoption or have questions, and they can struggle to voice it. It's hidden. It's something they think about at night. They look at their life story books at night. So we can't just rely on the child coming up with these questions. We need to foresee them. We need to accept that they're there, even from quite young, even at 9, 10, 11, they might be starting to think about their story and wonder about this mother or father or other shadow family that's out there and what that means for them. So if we're truly going to be empathic for the child, we need to be ready to bring up birth family and help them with that. We need to be comfort with the dual connection because they, whatever the legal situation is, they psychologically have connections with another family, a biological and a psychological connection with another family that may matter to them and that they may want to think about, talk about, and even connect with. We need to make sure that parents are the ones bringing it up, talking about it with them to show very explicitly and clearly, of course you can talk about this topic. You don't need to feel guilty. This matters to me as much as it matters to me. Adoption, communication, openness also involves empathy for the birth family because the child's relationship with the birth family will be complex. Birth family members are complex people with positive and negative characteristics, and we need to really truly understand them as people to help the child understand them as people, to understand their story, understand where they've come from. And that, of course, is so much easier if the adoptive parent has met the birth family. It can have a huge impact on them. I remember sitting next to an adoptive mother who adopted a child through early permanence. So she got to know the birth mother through court proceedings as well. She picked up her baby from hospital undergoing drug withdrawal, and that the mother was a heroin addict. And she said, when I picked up that baby, I was so angry at this mum who could take drugs knowing she was pregnant and carry on taking them throughout her pregnancy. She had so much anger and hate for this parent who could do that. But she said, when I saw her engage in court proceedings and contact with her child and really try so hard, but ultimately fail to give up her addiction, I saw another side to this story of addiction. I realized how hard it is to give up something when you're in this vulnerable state as this mother was. One meeting can have a huge impact. Even that mother had been through court proceedings with the birth mother of her child, but even one meeting can make a huge difference on how we see the birth family, understand them, and how we can then communicate that to the child to help them understand that why. And adoption communication openness is also about being ready to communicate with the birth family, to engaging in that communication so you can have that relationship when the child is ready for it, or if the child is ready for it as well. All these things are actually really hard to do when there is no contact. And we see that in our research when we measure communication openness in adoptive families. When we look at what adoptive parents are doing and thinking about their birth family of their child, we see that it's higher when they do have contact. All these things are higher when there is contact in adoption. So we need to sell it to adoptive parents and say, if this is really what you want to do to be the best parents for your child, this is what you need to do. Contact with adoptive parents can help them. We hear from adoptive parents after every contact. We have a conversation. We have to have a conversation because we're doing it. It's something to do with adoption or birth families, how I'm feeling about that. And how she's feeling about that. We're opening up. It's helping us bond as we talk about feelings of each other and our experience of this contact. So we've seen so far that without contact, problems are created for the child. Loss, identity problems, they're exasperated if there is no contact, which is typically the case. Birth parents and other relatives also find it harder to cope with the loss of the child. That's shown in research. And adoptive parents may find it harder to be communicatively open. They might find it harder to support their child to manage the issues of loss and identity. And we find that children may try and resolve these issues themselves with sometimes devastating consequences. So there can be benefits of maintaining relationships, and that's what I'm going to go through a bit more on the final few slides that I've got for you today, how it can help children answer their questions, maintain valued relationships, and have that trust that they really do have the whole truth about their story and feel they can open up with their adopters, because adopters are giving them this concrete demonstration of your birth family is okay for me too. I think about them. I see them as well, or I'm engaging with them too. Adoptive parents, it can help them have those conversations with the child and give them the information that can help them manage worries about their birth family, because they can model engaging with the birth family too. So it can help the child see that it's okay to think or connect with safe members of the birth family because I can see my adoptive parents doing that, or I'm modeling how to do it safe. It can help them feel close with the child and the birth family too, how it can reassure them and mitigate loss and help them to contribute to the child's life. In the review of 49 studies exploring contact in children's well-being, we can see that the conclusions were well-facilitated contact is associated with positive well-being outcomes for children and young people in both the short and the long term. Conversely, if it's poorly managed, if it's not good quality, then there are risks to children and young people. So we need to make sure it's good quality. We also need to listen to the views of children and young people, what they want, make sure we truly are responding to their needs, because we absolutely need to put them first. We need to recognize the significance of the wider family, not just the parents, because siblings, grandparents, and wider family members can be really important to make sure everyone is clear what it's about. It is about this lifelong journey of understanding and connecting with yourself. It isn't just about keeping the birth parents happy. At the early stages of the adoption, and we need to really make sure that all the planning is tailored to each child and regularly reviewed, and that skilled support is available. And I'm going to be picking up on many of those things in later webinars. The situation that we have at the moment is that contact planning is formulaic, although it is changing around the country. It's starting to change, and we are finding that some people are starting to look much more critically at every contact plan. And it'll be interesting to hear from you whether that's happened. But at the moment, it is mostly letter contact, and it mostly doesn't work well because of various factors, which I'll go through more in later webinars. Direct contact is very rare possibly causing unnecessary loss, which we know is harmful to children. We've heard all about that, breaking relationships. Very different to how we look at children in other permanency placements, such as kinship care, foster care, children of divorce. We're treating this in quite a different way. And I've seen children from the same family with the same parents, one who went to a special guardian placement, one who was adopted, vastly different contact plans for those children. Why? If there is direct contact, perhaps once a year or twice a year with siblings or the occasional adult birth relative, it's often so infrequent that it doesn't feel family-like. Or perhaps it's not set up in a safe way. Perhaps it's unsafe because the teenagers and birth relatives have actually connected with each other out of support arrangements, who've done it by themselves, which we know is really bad. And as I said, 1 in 5 was found to have done that in one of the recent adoption barometers. So that's our current situation, and it isn't great, and we need to change it. What does research say about face-to-face contact? Well, we saw that report which looked at 49 studies. From our research that we've done at UEA, we can certainly say, well, it's not best for everyone. And also the balance of benefits and challenges does vary, not just from family to family, but over time as well for the young people themselves. How young people feel about it is what matters most of all. Are they satisfied with the contact? That's related to positive outcomes. Of course, it's really hard to pick up that from a very young child because they will go along with what other adults are showing them. If the adults are feeling really awkward about contact, they will feel awkward about it as well. They're picking up the mood of the adults. So we need to help children, if we are going to have contact, because we do feel it's right, we need to absolutely feel that it's set up in a very natural way, and we give the adults time to get to know each other so they can model comfort and help the child to feel positive about it. But we also need to be really tuning into their needs and review contact regularly, because we need to make sure that it is meeting their needs. We know that face-to-face contact is actually more likely than letter exchange to endure over time. We found that in our research. And if it's grandparents or siblings, even more likely to be kept up over time, and almost always positive. And it can be highly beneficial for the children's well-being, as we saw in that review of different studies. We found that very strongly in our research. Things like helping the children just to simply feel cared for, not rejected, hugely important for their self-esteem. Enabled continuing relationships. How important is that for them to realize that relationships are permanent? They are forever. They don't just disappear, and it can assist with identity development and help adoptive parents as well. So we see that in face-to-face contact. We saw no evidence in our longitudinal study, which I've referenced here, no evidence that it damaged adoptive family relationships. Instead, it seemed to actually help mostly. Identity development was promoted by it. Satisfaction with it mattered more. Satisfaction associated with the contact quality and stability mattered more than type. So it wasn't so much that we could say, well, letterbox is not as good as face-to-face, or face-to-face not as good. It was about what is quality. Quality and it carrying on is important. It's the sudden stopping which doesn't work, but contact which can carry on, stay there and be positive, meeting the child's needs is what's satisfied. It's the gaps or stopping contact or missing information, not having information, which is generally where we saw young people dissatisfied. When we asked young people what we should do about contact, most saw that there were benefits in having it, even if they didn't particularly want it very much themselves. What they did argue is that the option should always be there, and many were aware how they'd changed as teenagers, suddenly wanting information that they didn't have before. So things needed to be kept open because things did change over time for them. We looked at adoption identity because we were particularly interested in how contact could feed into people's identity. And we found that around half of our sample had a very cohesive sense of their identity, a very balanced view of their adoption. They felt at ease with it. They felt it made sense to them. And we know that this is something that's really important, that you feel at ease with your adoption. It makes sense to you. You feel you can trust it. And you can look at the paper to get more details on all the other different types of identity that I don't have time to go into in this webinar, but just focusing on cohesive, a story that makes sense and how important that is for people. We found that this was the kind of thing we were hearing people say in that cohesive group. When my birth mum was born, her mum didn't have a very good upbringing. So when it came to having kids, she mixed with the wrong people with drugs. It was safer for us to be adopted. And meeting my mum, it made me understand why she did it and that. So that's the kind of story that made sense. And another person said, in fact, this is the young person who I interviewed as a child, and he said he thought his mum was a bit like a witch. If you remember, I mentioned that earlier. Well, here's what he said when we came back to him as an adult. Because I didn't meet her from an early age, I was just going on what I'd been told, really, and they weren't really good things. It was only negative things going round in my head. I was thinking of her in my head as this person that didn't want me, caused me injuries. He also met her as a teenager, and he said, I then knew she did want me. Because of her illness, she couldn't have me. She didn't give me up because she chose to. It was because she wasn't in a mentally safe place where she could cope with me. What a lovely ending to this story. He's no longer thinking of his mother as a witch, as someone wicked. He has a full sense of her character. And most importantly, he said, love. She wanted me. She didn't give me up because she chose to. She did want me, the thing that most young people want. As you can see from those two quotes, the meeting made a big difference. We did find that most of those having this cohesive sense of identity were having continued birth family contact compared to others. It was kept up. They had a sense of who their parents were, or another member of their birth family. And we also found that adoptive parent communication openness was higher in the cohesive identity group as well. And some of those who had very high levels of communicative openness may not have had the contact, perhaps because the child didn't want it or it wasn't possible, but they still kept talking about it. And it was, and scaffolding the child's thinking about their parents and why they might not have been able to care for them. So really helping them with their story, even if they didn't have the contact. So both things mattered, and it's impossible to unpick them. You need both, really. It helps to have contact if you can, but communicative openness is really important. Throughout our time at UEA, we've also had good links with international researchers as well, and we know that in some cases, like in the States, for example, it can be very common to have more open adoptions, and we can hear when they've done comparisons of those in more open or fully disclosed adoptions where there's more regular contact, we can find that there are positives to that too. Another US study as well, which referred to greater contact was really helpful for the children. And in Australia, another really important book to read. Again, I don't have much time to talk about it here. In Australia, in New South Wales anyway, it was mandatory for adoptees to have contact up until they're 12 years old. And even if they don't actually want it, it's pretty mandatory unless it's, obviously causing very severe harm. And it was a difficult journey. They got very little support for it. But looking back, the interviewees, the majority said that even though it caused short-term pain, ultimately it had been beneficial. And we're talking about children who were adopted at an older age with difficult histories, and this was very complex contact. Even then, they could see it was direct. I'm not saying we should make face-to-face mandatory, but when we look at studies like this, we need to think, well, hang on a minute, why don't we harness more of these benefits? Not that we should have all the complex cases. We do need to look at this in a case-by-case basis, but we do find it can be helpful. And sibling contact too. The review of the 49 studies I mentioned earlier said sibling contact could be hugely beneficial in some cases, giving people that sense of belonging to birth family, developing a sense of identity, helping them maintain relationships with siblings, which can sometimes be so positive, incredible bonds we can see between siblings. Some sibling relationships are damaging, and that's why perhaps they're separated, but that doesn't mean they will stay damaged forever. And sometimes having contact when they're both or the whole group is securely placed receiving good parenting, we can help improve those relationships, and they can be really important. And it can be so hard to rekindle that sibling relationship as an adult if they miss out on it as a child, growing up together, having memories in a natural sibling type way. And we've seen so many examples of that in our studies, of lots of great reasons for brothers and sisters to stay in touch. I can't go into detail about this because time is pressing, but I did a whole webinar on siblings and heard about some lovely stories of really important sibling contact, including one where an adoptive parent was able to maintain contact with an older brother of her child who stayed with the birth mother. In many cases, we break up sibling connections when any of the siblings are with any birth family member, even if it's with a special guardian, which I find quite surprising. Sometimes we might be worried because we think, well, one of the older siblings is seeing a birth parent, but is that really a risk for this child? Let's really unpick it, and we'll be talking more of how to unpick risk and how to do that in later webinars. But there can be so many benefits from having sibling contact. And a couple of quotes from our studies. It's been nice seeing my brother and sister, said a 20-year-old young man with learning difficulties. It's been a great opportunity of being with them. We've just had fun, laughs, amazing good times. These siblings that he's had this relationship with, maybe when he grows older, be the most long-lasting relationship in his life, because of course parents die. Both of my parents are dead, and my siblings are the ones now who are the longest lasting relationship I have. Remember, adoption is for life. We should be really thinking ahead to what we want these siblings to be like in the future. An adoptive mother talking about how her son became more mature. He seemed to grow up. He seemed to settle, more grounded, knowing his siblings. He could relax knowing that they were fine and that he could still have that relationship. We need to sell this to adoptive parents as well and help them to realize it can truly help your child. And what about extended family members? So much of my research, our research at UEA, we can see incredible valued connections with extended family members, such as aunts, uncles, or grandparents. This adoptive parent talks about how her daughter Kerry had been getting upset but wouldn't talk to her adoptive mum about it. But one day birth aunt came over, because that's the relationship they had with birth aunt. She just burst into tears and I left her talking to birth aunt. That was so nice. She could have that link. They talked about different things about the family, what happened with Kerry as a baby. I've recently, I'm currently doing a study on children raised in special guardian families, and one of my young people who doesn't have any contact with his father, he's in the maternal extended family. That's where his special guardian is, in the maternal family. And he doesn't have any contact with his father. He doesn't want any contact with his father because he's heard he hurt his mum. He hasn't got off drugs. He's in prison at the moment. But what this young man had recently was a week's stay with his paternal aunt, the father's sister. It was someone he'd never met before. But he was curious to know about her and her cousins. And this paternal aunt reached out to him and encouraged him to come and visit them. He actually stayed a few days with them. And it was so nice, he said, to see that there was someone in my paternal family who was so lovely. And we mustn't forget that sometimes extended family members who don't have a relationship with the baby we are adopting at that point in time can still be such a valuable resource to them in the future, to talk about their birth family, why their parents ended up as they ended up, and also show them that different people from your birth family follow different journeys, different trajectories. Your genetic history isn't all negative. There's a mixture of people who made different decisions and went different journeys, and you can too. Quality contact. We saw in the research that what we should be aiming for is quality contact. I'll be talking more about that in a later webinar on planning contact, but let's just hear in one of my final slides about someone we called Chiara from our longitudinal study. She had very regular, lovely contact with her birth grandma that felt quite normal. She said, we were a real family. We'd go somewhere quite normal. She was like a proper nan. I'd go and give her a hug. I really like seeing her. A really lovely relationship with her gran that she was able to continue, and someone she knew had never disappeared from her, had stood by her throughout her entire life from birth onwards. And I like the way she often uses the words real, normal, proper, almost as if she needs to know that her birth family is normal too. Because her mum, well, her mum was awkward. It was nice to see her, but and yeah, it was nice to know who she is and what she was like. So I don't have a fantasy about her, but that contact was tricky. Mum was hard to engage with, but they did have regular annual contact. And looking back, she says, yeah, there was ups and downs with it, but I don't have a fantasy world. I know why I was adopted, something we know is really important. And I don't have this fantasy of this wonderful birth mother that's better than my adoptive parents. Now I'm a teenager. I know that's not going to happen. And what about contact with her dad? He's always been the one I haven't been allowed to see. It makes you want to know more and see him more. So where's the quality contact? Definitely with her grandmother. With her mother, didn't feel like good quality, but actually, looking back, it really was, because it's helped her know why she was adopted and have that connection and take away that wondering about her birth family. The father, definitely not quality contact. Contact like this can be dangerous and can make people venture out into unsupported, self-initiated contact that is extremely harmful, as we know. What a shame there wasn't someone from her birth family, at least like an aunt or somebody, that could have helped her to connect with her birth family, even if it couldn't be her father, perhaps because of what happened. But yeah, so I'll leave you with those quotes because I think they really do sum up what we mean by quality contact and shed light on the risks of not having contact. Okay, so I have talked a lot, and I would like to open up the last few minutes of this session to any thoughts, any comments, and any questions. I know, Vicky, you've been there answering. You will get a copy of the slides. We have all our resources on there, but I'm going to stop sharing now to give space, I think, hopefully, for anybody who would like to come in and say something in response to this first webinar of our series. Vicky, how's the chat been?
Yeah, I just thought there's a couple in the chat, so I'm not sure if I think it was Max who put this one in. It's about how do you support adopters who are clear that they just want a child of their own, as they want to have their own family, and that's their perspective. I don't know, Max, if you want to expand on that or not. Just your thoughts.
It's self-explanatory.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a challenge. It's really worrying that an adoptive parent can move through adoptive training, preparation, and feel that way. It makes me wonder about the training, and I would query what's going on in the training. Do they have voices of people with lived experience contributing to that training? Adults, have they watched things? We have a video, a 26-minute video of young people talking about their contact in adoption. In our study that's on one of our websites, we have a wealth of resources from the Post Adoption Centre on YouTube, PAC UK on YouTube, where we have the voices of lived experience talking about what they valued most into their adoptive parenting. I would challenge them why they think this is the best way to be a parent for their child. And I would make sure they have been exposed to these voices of people with lived experience, the whole range. And yes, children need to feel they belong absolutely and definitely in their adoptive family. They need to know it's their adoption for life. But what we see in research is that doesn't stop them also feeling a connection. In many cases, every child is different, but in many cases, they can feel a connection to their birth family, and they need to know what are they going to do about that? Do they want their child to go through their adoption thinking that this is something they can't talk about, that this is something that's not accepted in their family? You know, it's interesting. I remember interviewing an adoptive couple, actually adoptive family in our longitudinal study, and they were quite closed and wanted the children to be their children in that kind of way, and didn't really see the benefits of an open adoption or linking with the birth family. When we came back to them when the children were teenagers, that couple had divorced. The adoptive parents had divorced, had remarried, and their whole attitude had completely changed. The young person who we interviewed from that family told us proudly that she has 3 dads. She has a adopted dad, a stepdad, and a birth dad, because they'd opened up contact to face-to-face contact with birth dad, and she loved them all and felt she was so lucky to have 3 dads. And I think, yeah, maybe tune into their own experience of, can you really only have one parent? I remember hearing a quote that we shouldn't think about who does the child belong to, but who belongs to the child. Yes, we have one parent who is the parent, the safe, secure base, solid, forever parent. But children can have no problem with caring or thinking about or needing to know that someone else loves them. In my special guardian research, I have heard so many children call their special guardians mum and dad and their birth parents mum and dad. It's very confusing for me as an interviewer. To them, it's not confusing at all. But they know who they want to be with. They absolutely know who is safe, secure, and who is their everyday parent. So yeah, question the training and think about, is this the right people to adopt, actually?
I was primarily talking about little babies.
Yep. But those babies grow up. So adoption is for life. And many of those quotes that I put on the presentation slides today were from people who were adopted as babies. And they still had those feelings of being connected to another family, or needing, or having questions, just needing to know their other family. And I'd really value any other thoughts on that, because it's challenging, and it is something that a lot of people say to me that they can struggle with. Some adoptive parents who do struggle with this idea of there being a birth family. Abby, do you want to come on and
Hi.
contribute?
Yeah, I just want to say it's been really useful. I know in Leicestershire we're doing a lot of work around adoption, exploring open adoption, and particularly for a lot of us, that contact with siblings is really important. So for example, I've got a 4th child. The first 3 are with family, auntie, grandparents, but the plan for this child's adoption, because families just aren't in a position to keep having children. And I had a chat with the guardian yesterday, and that's something that she was really worried about. And I says, as their IRO, that is something that I'll continue to look at, and will be challenging, a potential match, because for this child, how's she going to feel as she gets older, knowing that her siblings are having contact with mum and she's not? So that's something we really want to be talking about when, I suppose it's getting that right match, isn't it? And I know those discussions when, adopters are being assessed through Leicestershire, those discussions are happening from a very early point, to get them really understanding of that trauma and how that continue, because we know, sadly, adoptions do break down as children get older. And what they do tell us, a lot of that is around them struggling with their identity, feeling like parents have lied to them, or those kind of things. So I think it's just really reinforcing the values. It's quite simple when you say it, but actually it's how deep we always think about it, actually, isn't it, when we're all so busy, and how actually as RAs we need to just stand back and ask those questions.
And of course, the adopters that we match to the child should be the ones who want to do the very best for that child, whatever the plan should be. So when we think about it, it's about getting the right adopters. Any adoptive parent should put the child first and not want to break relationships which could be damaging, either right now or in the future. Sarah, do you want to come in? Sarah Hobbs.
Hi. I suppose I was just thinking, is there a standard sort of national way of assessing adopters with this more modern approach? Because the way to find adopters has changed over time, hasn't it? And what you've just presented is for the modern time and makes absolute sense. But is everyone doing that? Are all adoption teams who go out and find adopters, are they training them? Because it is about training and educating, isn't it? In that way, because a lot of adopters are scared of birth families and breaking it down and all of that. You know, it comes from a place of fear. So I'm just wondering how that training can be sort of out there for everyone who wants to adopt, so they're not afraid to be in touch with birth families.
Well, it's very variable. Vicky, you can come on and talk a bit more about this too, can't you? Working with RAAs and adoption and agencies across the whole country. But yeah, change is happening, but it's bit by bit. It's a whole culture change we're seeing. So you may be working with local authorities who are very far forward in this, or local authorities who are much further back in this. So one of the reasons we want to just talk to as many different people as possible, including IROs, is because you can start being part of this culture change, saying, challenging, talking, telling people about the resources that we have on offer to them. Yeah, you have such an important role, and we'll be talking more about that in later webinars. Vicky, did you want to come in and say anything finally before we end?
Yeah, I was just aware of time. Thanks for that question, Sarah. I think in terms of what we're doing from that national perspective from Adoption England is we've just launched our Adopter Journey Standards, which includes the preparation and training. And we're also have a strand of lived experience, voice and influence work for Adoption England that we're trying to support regional adoption agencies to filter through their training, etc., similar to one of Julie's answers about the importance of having lived experience within the training that we offer. So change is coming, but it won't just all happen at once, I guess is my answer to that. But yes, we are producing standards that we are hoping agencies work towards.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say it's been a very packed first webinar, so we have now come to the end, and I'm really looking forward to reading all the chat comments that I missed out on while I was talking. We'll have more time to discuss and reflect in later webinars where we'll be carrying on with this topic and thinking about how we can make changes in practice. Thank you all for your attention today, and hopefully I will see you in subsequent webinars.
Thank you.
Thanks ever so much,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Remember to spread the word, sign up. Okay. Thanks
Thank you,
very
Sharon.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Has Sharon gone?
Oh, she seems to have gone. Yes, I was going to say to her,
Thanks.
yes, and also I'd like a copy of the chat because I haven't had time to.
I don't think I've got permissions at all. I don't have permissions, to download it and things like that.
Yeah, that's why I think hopefully she can pass it on to me. I'll try and look quickly through before.
If you send a message on this chat, you should see it. I'm organizing. Great to meet you.
I can see you've been answering all questions. That's great, Vicky. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a few. There was a few. So I've sent Sharon a message on the chat because it'll pop up, in her inbox feed. So if you message in the chat now, and tag Sharon for @ and then a name and then say, can you try and send me the transcript of the chat? It should work like that rather than having to email her. She should see it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm doing that right now. Thanks, Vicky.
All right, I hope you feel better, Julie. I could hear you.
Yeah, it's been dragging on. I had it. Yeah, it was. I was much worse last week during the Kafka seminar. Really struggling. Yeah. But hopefully it didn't come through too much in the session. Here she is. Yeah. Hi, Sharon.
Sorry,
Thanks.
I just popped in with a view to trying to log out and stuff. Okay, that was really good, wasn't it? So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, Sharon, I was just going to say, would you be able to send me the chat? You can sometimes do a download or copy and paste. Or
I will have a go. I will have a go, Julie. If you could send me the PowerPoint slides, that will be really helpful. And I will have a go at sending you the chat at some point. All right, lovely.
Lovely.
But thank you so much. I've got to dash off to another
Yeah,
meeting.
thank you,
now,
Sharon.
so
I'll
I'm
see you
just
on
gonna-
the
Sharon.
10th of
See you later.
December.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you. Bye
Take care.
then.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.